When I think back to my childhood, I remember the weekly ritual of my family gathering around our black and white television set. The flickering images of the small screen captivated me, transporting me to far-off lands and introducing me to characters that shaped my imagination. But it wasn't just about the shows, it was about the shared experience. The way the entire family would be glued to the set, laughing, crying, and cheering together. These moments of togetherness created an unbreakable bond among us. It was a time when the television wasn't just a source of entertainment, but a window to the world, a tool for education, and most importantly, a catalyst for creating lasting memories. In the pre-satellite and cable television days, owning a TV was a luxury not every household could afford. However, as the decade progressed, television ownership became more common, transforming the way people spent their leisure time. As a child growing up in the 1960s, do you remember the excitement of those early days when your family got their first black and white television set? How did it change your family's evenings? Do you remember the special place you were given in front of the television set? What programs did you watch? Did you have a favorite chair or a special treat you enjoyed while watching TV? We'd love to hear your stories. Share them in the comments below. The 1960s was a significant era for television in Britain. By the end of the 1950s, about 20% of all homes had a TV set. By the end of the 1960s, this figure rose to almost 90%. This growth was largely due to the introduction of new, more affordable models and the increasing popularity of television. As a form of entertainment, televisions were no longer a luxury item. They became an essential part of British homes. During the 1960s, British television was dominated by the BBC. The BBC was not just a broadcasting company, it was seen as a national institution. The BBC was known for its high-quality programming, which was both entertaining and educational. Programs like Blue Peter, Doctor Who, The Morecambe and Wise Show, Ready, Steady, Go, Top of the Pops, and the nightly news were a staple of British television during this era. People across the country relied on the BBC for their news, their fun, and their entertainment. The BBC was more than a broadcaster. It was a companion, a teacher, and a friend for many families. Evenings were planned around the BBC schedule. Dinner times were adjusted so that everyone could be home in time for their favorite programs. Weekends were spent watching the latest edition of Panorama or This Is Your Life. And special occasions were marked by gathering together to watch events like the Royal Wedding or the Moon Landings. The BBC was a part of British life, but it wasn't just the programs that made the BBC so popular, it was also the way they were broadcast. Back then, there were no video recorders, no streaming services, and certainly no internet. If you wanted to watch a program, you had to watch it when it was broadcast live. This created a sense of community among viewers. People would talk about the latest episodes of their favorite shows the next day at work or school. They would discuss the plot twists, the comedic moments, and the latest news. The BBC was a shared experience that brought people together. Moreover, it was a time when television was seen as a tool for education as well as entertainment. The BBC produced a wide range of educational programs that were designed to inform and enlighten viewers. These programs covered a variety of topics from science and nature to history and culture. They were both entertaining and informative. They sparked curiosity and encouraged viewers to learn more about the world around them. So do you? Remember the first time your family gathered around a black and white television set? How did it make you feel? What do you think about the impact of the BBC on British culture? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, please like it, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell icon so you never miss another trip down memory lane. And if by any chance there's any mistake in this video, please forgive us. And most importantly, please watch this video all the way through. Your support keeps history alive. Thank you for joining us on this nostalgia journey. Did you ever watch a film or TV show that had been dubbed into your language? If so, you probably noticed that the lip movements of the actors didn't match the words you were hearing. This happens because it isn't easy to copy the exact timing of the original voices. People who speak different languages tend to speak at different speeds, and the process of finding voice actors who can match the speed of the original speakers and still fit their dialogue into the right time frame is both challenging and expensive. But in one country, the voice acting is nearly perfect. In the UK, they have found a way to keep the original voices without the need for expensive re-recording. And what makes this possible are old cathode ray tube TVs like this one. They have managed to preserve an audiovisual culture, something that may seem very trivial, but has a profound impact on the quality of life in that country. In the 1960s and 70s, the British Broadcasting Corporation, or BBC, dominated the UK television market. Even the daily schedule was a ritual. The BBC would begin in the afternoon with educational programs or children's shows. By evening, the real magic started. Drama serials, news, comedy, and variety shows. Families would gather early, ensuring the aerial on the roof was adjusted properly to catch the signal. Sometimes a father or older brother would climb up and twist the antenna, while someone inside shouted, "A bit more. No. Too far. Yes. Hold it there." The picture was not always clear. Lines, flickers, and snow often danced across the screen. Yet even through the fuzziness, the excitement was real. It was moving pictures in your own living room. So what if the image wasn't always sharp? What mattered most was that a family could share experiences together. They would all sit in the dark, glued to the screen. They would laugh and cry, gasp and cheer, as actors brought stories to life. They would learn about faraway lands and meet people unlike themselves. It was a window to the world. How do I know this? Because I asked my dad. He told me about how he and my grandpa would sit on the floor in front of the wireless, listening to comedies like Crazy Gang or music hall shows. My grandpa then got my grandma an Echo record player, which allowed her to listen while doing housework. And when my dad was born, he would sit in his pram by the wireless listening to the shipping forecast. After a few years, they upgraded to a television. I recently came across this clip of a commercial for a brand of custard powder, and it brought back memories of my own childhood. We had a big box television in our house, and every Saturday morning we would sit down to watch the kids' TV show Blue Peter. Some of the things they did on that show were impossible, like bending spoons with their minds or making balls float. But it didn't matter. It was fun to try anyway. I also remember the smell of the television. Electronics don't really have a distinct smell, but this one did. Perhaps it was the heat, or the fluorescent tubes, or the wooden case, but it smelled like Saturdays. And as a child, I thought all television smelled like that. Only later did I realize that they don't. I was born in the 1980s, which means I spent part of my childhood watching the old cathode ray tube televisions. But by the time I was a teenager, flat screen TVs were already commonplace. Now I have a laptop, to smartphones, an iPad, and several clocks that all have higher resolution screens than that big box television. But how many of us spend quality time with our devices? How often do we let them enhance rather than dominate our lives? Most of the time, our gadgets are little more than extensions of ourselves. They serve our purposes, and we rarely think beyond that. But in the UK, they recognize that television could be more than just a device. It could be a source of national identity. So they have put measures in place to protect the experience of watching television. And that begins with the broadcasting companies. For example, when ITV decided to air a classic episode of its show Lingo, the audio track was not changed. They used the original recording, even though that meant the lip movements weren't a perfect match. What's more, the commercials that interrupted the program were recorded with the same audio delay. They didn't use modern equipment to re-record the ads with digitally altered soundtracks. This might seem like a very small thing, but it's actually quite significant. To understand why, consider the sentence, "You can't imagine how much I love you." If it's said at normal speed, it doesn't sound strange. But if the speaker deliberately drags out the word imagine, it sounds odd and unnatural. In fact, it's so jarring that we usually take steps to make sense of it. We shorten the word imagine in our minds, or we mentally alter the next word to make it fit. But if we are watching television, we can't do this. We can't change the dialogue or the commercials in our minds because there are too many variables. Someone else is controlling the soundtrack, and that person has complete creative control over the words we hear and when we hear them. In a way, we lose some of our autonomy. We become passive consumers. It gets worse when you watch a dubbed foreign film. If we hear a line that's too slow, we don't think, "Oh, that actor speaks slowly." Instead, we blame the dubbing. We say the line was poorly timed. But if we hear a line that's too fast, we don't think, "Oh, that actor speaks quickly." We blame ourselves. We say we must have missed something. In other words, when we watch television, we lose our ability to interpret situations independently. It's the same when we read subtitles. When a subtitle says, "He spoke too quickly," we don't think the character has a speech impediment. We blame the translator. When a subtitle says they spoke too slowly, we don't think those characters are stupid. We blame ourselves. Again, we lose our ability to interpret the world on screen. But with television in the UK, this does not happen. Why? Because the audio track is not altered. It's the same as the original broadcast. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to watching cathode ray tube televisions. They're bulky, inefficient, and dangerous. The glass can be lethal. You have to turn the set over to change channels, and the picture degrades rapidly. Still, there is a lot to be said for having a television that is immune to tampering, a television that is preserved exactly as it was originally intended to be seen. Perhaps that's why Brits are so attached to their BBC. While the rest of Europe was switching to digital terrestrial television in the early 2010s, the BBC continued to broadcast on both analog and digital frequencies. Although the digital signal was supposed to be more reliable and higher quality, analog was familiar and trustworthy. Many viewers didn't make the switch. It was until 2012 that the BBC finally shut down its analog transmitters and turned off the old televisions became a reality. That day, around 1.5 million households lost access to their televisions. Some people described it as a shock. Others called it an apocalypse. Overnight, pubs, care homes, and hospitals went dark. Funeral directors struggled to keep services running. Television had been such a constant presence in British life that turning it off created chaos. There's a lesson here for those of us who live in the cloud. We store our photos online. We stream our movies and download our music. We've sacrificed reliability and permanence for convenience. But in a world where everything changes in the blink of an eye, perhaps we need a place where nothing changes. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Hi there, this is your host. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look back at how British families watched TV in the 1960s. So let's begin. The day started like any other. The morning newspaper arrived, the wireless was playing softly in the kitchen, and children were getting ready for school. As the morning progressed, the house began to empty. Doors slammed, bikes were pulled out, and soon only the mother remained, sitting quietly with a cup of tea and the wireless. Life in the 1960s was structured around the radio. Even the BBC closed down at night was an event. After the final program, the national anthem would play. The picture would fade and the screen would shrink to a tiny white dot before going dark. Families would say goodnight and switch off the set, as if the entire country was going to sleep together. Those days, television was still new. It had not yet taken over every hour of daily life. Families still talked, played, and ate together. But when the BBC was on, life seemed to pause. The television gave people not just entertainment, but a sense of connection. For the first time in history, millions of British families could share the same moment at the same time. There was a ritual to it. The father would bring in the coal and newspapers to feed the fire. The mother would straighten the cushions on the settee, and the children would settle down with their bowls of pop, corn ready for the adventure that would unfold before them. It wasn't just the programs that made television so captivating. It was also the technology. Those old television sets were huge, boxy things with knobs and dials that seemed almost magical. Children would be fascinated by the spinning disc inside the set. That somehow created moving pictures, and when the program was finished, they would linger by the set. As their parents turned off the television and prepared for bed, of course, television wasn't all serious business. It was also a lot of fun. Families would gather around the set to watch comedy shows like Till Death Us Part or The Avengers. They would sing along to the pop songs on top of the pops or cheer wildly. During the football results, the arrival of color television in the 1960s brought a new level of excitement. Families would crowd around the set to watch the first color broadcasts, marveling at the vibrant hues. The most popular programs were the ones that everyone could enjoy together. There was something magical about watching a show like The Wizard of Oz or Mary Poppins, knowing that everyone in the family was sharing the same experience. But as the years went by, television started to change. There were more channels, more options, and eventually, television took over every hour of the day. Families stopped gathering around the set to watch the evening news, and instead, they started watching different shows at different times. Children were allowed to stay up later to watch the latest American series, and adults would settle down with a late-night documentary, as we know it today. Television has lost much of its former magic. There are too many choices, too much noise, and not enough time to watch everything. But back in the 1960s, it was different. Television was an event. It was something that everyone shared together. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, if you lived in a city or a village, if you were a man or a woman, television brought people together. So next time you're sitting down to watch your favorite show, Take a moment to remember the good old days when television was an event. Thank you for watching. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite TV program was. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until next time. It's easy to forget now, but not so long ago, television wasn't even in black and white. So how did it go from this to that? Well, in part thanks to the launch of BBC Two in 1964, which brought a wider variety of programs to our screens, though not every household could receive it at first. Families who did were considered modern. In fact, neighbors would sometimes gather at their house just to experience this new channel. For those lucky enough to have a television, it was a privilege not taken for granted. Gently tap the TV set on the side if the picture started rolling or the sound was crackling was a universal childhood memory, and children were told to stand up and adjust the indoor aerial until the lines on the screen disappeared. Those were the days when Dad knew his way around the wireless. For many families, the wireless was the only source of entertainment, bringing them together like nothing else. And my earliest memories are of sitting at the age of 4 watching the Queen's Christmas speech. It was a ritual, a moment in time shared by millions. In the 1960s, television slowly became more than just news and simple shows. It became culture, art, identity. And nowhere was this more evident than in the great moments that unfolded on our screens. Remember those times when your father or grandfather would tap the TV set gently on the side because the picture had started rolling or the sound was crackling? Or when children were told to stand up and adjust the indoor aerial until the lines on the screen disappeared? This was all part of the ritual of watching TV in the 1960s. Families huddled together in 1966 to watch England's World Cup victory. Though only in black and white, the emotion was no less powerful. Streets and pubs erupted with cheers. At home, fathers lifted their children into the air with pride as Jeff Hurst scored the historic goal. It was not just sport, it was shared history. On other evenings, it seemed like the whole neighborhood was watching the same program at the same time. From Coronation Street to the Forsyte Saga, British drama began to take hold of the nation. Families would discuss the characters the next morning at school or work, sharing opinions as if the people on the screen were part of their own lives. Television united people in a way nothing else could. But television in the 1960s was also about patience. There were no remote controls, no pause buttons, and certainly no streaming. If you missed a program, you had simply missed it. That made each broadcast more precious. Families planned their evenings around television schedules printed in the Radio Times. It was discipline mixed with excitement, the thrill of waiting for a favorite show, knowing it would only happen once. And nowhere was this more evident than in the great moments that unfolded on our screens. Remember those times when your father or grandfather would tap the TV set gently on the side because the picture had started rolling or the sound was crackling? Or when children were told to stand up and adjust the indoor aerial until the lines on the screen disappeared? This was all part of the ritual of watching TV in the 1960s. Imagine the drama of a cliffhanger ending and then think about how much more intense it was back then because there was no way to know what was going to happen next. You couldn't fast forward, rewind, or even pause to think about what might come next. You were at the mercy of the flickering images on the screen and the whims of the storyteller, and this created a bond between the audience and the characters. That is hard to imagine today. We were all in this together, experiencing joy, sorrow, love, and loss right alongside them. And when the final episode aired, it felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. Those were the days when television was more than just a box in the corner of the room. It was a window to the world, a mirror to our lives, and a companion through the ups and downs of everyday existence. Of course, times have changed. Today we have an array of channels and streaming services at our fingertips. We can watch what we want, when we want, and where we want. But in the golden age of black and white television, there was a simplicity, a purity to the viewing experience that is hard to recapture. It was a time when families came together in the evenings to watch the wireless. A time when the flickering images on the screen had the power to captivate and enthrall. In the 1960s, Britain was transformed by the arrival of television. But as we've seen in Part 1 and Part 2, it wasn't just about the content. It was also about how people interacted with this new technology. The first thing to note is that the actual set itself was often treated with respect, almost like a piece of furniture. It was certainly no eyesore. Manufacturers took great pride in their products, which often featured stylish wooden cabinets, sometimes complete with a radio on top. Indeed, some families even covered their TV with lace or a decorative cloth when it was turned off. as though it needed to be dressed properly for a lady's drawing room. The black and white glow which filled the room was not merely seen as a backdrop to family life, but became an integral part of it. It created a special atmosphere, a strange mixture of modern progress and homely comfort, and it was an experience shared by millions of families across the country. As one commentator put it, it was a magical thing, the wireless, and everyone sat around it as if it was an oracle. Children loved it, too. The magic of moving pictures captivated their imaginations. To them, the flickering images on the screen were like living, breathing things. One young girl later recalled how she and her brother would sit transfixed for hours on end, watching the adventures of Robin Hood. In a world before computers and mobile phones, television was the ultimate source of entertainment. It brought adventure, excitement, and escapism into people's lives, and children were particularly drawn to this. The BBC's Blue Peter, which first aired in 1958, quickly became a favorite among youngsters. Its mixture of games, crafts, pets, and even the occasional daring stunt made it a must-watch for millions. The show's prisoners became household names and inspired a whole generation of children to make their own programs. But as the 1960s moved towards its end, a new development was just around the corner. Whispers of colored television began to spread. Although most households still had black and white sets, by the late 1960s, shops had begun displaying color TVs in their windows. The sets themselves were huge, dominating entire floors, and were completely out of reach for the average family. Nevertheless, children pressed their noses against the glass, dreaming of the day when their favorite shows would burst into life with real color. That moment was coming soon, but in the 1960s, the black and white world had its own charm. It was a world where imagination filled in the colors. Evenings were spent watching shows like The Avengers or Man in a Suitcase, while outside, darkness fell and the only light came from the television set. Later, after the watershed, adults might stay up to watch the late-night movie. The whole family might gather together again to watch the news or a documentary. In the 1960s, television viewing was a communal experience. It brought people together and provided a shared focus for their attention. This was especially true on Saturday mornings when children would gather around the wireless to listen to the adventures of the Archers. This long-running radio drama was a staple of British life, and its characters were as familiar to many families as their own relatives. But what about the adverts? After all, television was a new and expensive luxury, and manufacturers were eager to promote their products. From the mid-1950s, commercial television began to show advertisements during the limited number of advertising breaks, and these adverts often became part of the family viewing experience. Children would be sent to fetch the grown-ups to come and see something funny or interesting. Adverts for things like washing powder or chocolate bars were memorable and creative. They used jingles and memorable slogans to stick in the minds of viewers. In fact, television commercials became an art form in themselves and helped to make the 1960s the golden age of advertising. In conclusion, in the 1960s, British families viewed television as a privilege and a pleasure. They saw it as a way of bringing the family closer together and providing a shared focus for their attention. The 1960s was a time when black and white television was still the norm, but color television was just around the corner. The experience of watching television in the 1960s was a unique one, a combination of technological marvel, entertainment, and social ritual. It was a time when families gathered around the set to watch their favorite programs, and when the flickering glow of the screen illuminated their faces with wonder and delight. In the 1960s, television was more than just a box in the corner of the room. It was a window to the world, a source of knowledge, and a catalyst for family bonding. It was a time when television was truly a magic box, and British families embraced it with open arms. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. It's fair to say we spend far too much time staring at glowing rectangles these days, especially our kids. But it wasn't always this way. And when television first arrived in British homes, it was a shared experience that captivated the entire family, bringing them together like nothing before it. Now, when people think of the history of television, they usually think of the BBC, the first channel to broadcast in the UK back in 1936. It showed serious documentaries, cultural programs, news, and entertainment. It was funded by the license fee, which made it relatively free from commercial pressures. The BBC was a public service operated by the British Broadcasting Corporation, but the BBC and ITV gave viewers to very different flavors of television. ITV, introduced in 1955, was brighter, livelier, and packed with adverts. And it changed television forever. For the first time, children in Britain saw jingles for chocolate, soap powder, and toys appear between their favorite shows. And many of us still remember humming those catchy tunes the next morning at school. It is amazing how something that started out as a simple background jingle can get stuck in your head for weeks. We're never quite sure what will catch on and what won't. It's all a matter of chance. But these jingles were carefully crafted to appeal to the emotions. Whether it was the promise of fun and adventure or the nostalgia of simpler times, they tugged at our heartstrings and made us feel something. And who doesn't love a good tune? That's why so many of us still remember the jingles from our childhood. And even if we don't realize it, they have a profound effect on us. Sports also brought whole neighborhoods together. People would stop whatever they were doing to watch their favorite teams play. They'd cheer and jeer, celebrate goals and commiserate defeats as if they were part of the action themselves. It was a shared experience that created a sense of community and belonging. Those magical moments when the ball hit the back of the net or the winning try was scored, they brought neighbors together, spilling out onto the streets to celebrate. Now, I could still remember watching the World Cup final in 1966. England won, of course. They beat West Germany 4-2 after extra time. The entire nation went wild. But we were only a small village then, and the excitement was palpable. The streets were filled with people hugging strangers, dancing, singing, and the sound of car horns blared incessantly. When England won the World Cup in 1966, the nation celebrated not just in stadiums, but in living rooms across the land. Families crowded around tiny screens, cheering as Jeff Hurst scored that unforgettable hat-trick. The older ones were drinking, smoking, and shouting advice. Even though the broadcast was in black and white, the memory remains colorful in every sense. Can you imagine the roar of neighbors through open windows, the cheers spilling out into the streets, and the pride of a nation carried through a flickering signal? There was no mobile phones, social media, or streaming services. Back then, there was only radio, newspapers, and television. The idea of watching a live event without sharing the experience with others is almost unimaginable. But somehow it didn't matter. We were all united by the love of the game and the hope of victory. And as we watched the final minutes tick away, the tension was almost unbearable. But then it happened. Hurst rounded the West German goalkeeper and slotted the ball into the net. The crowd erupted, and so did we. It was pandemonium, but amidst the chaos, there was a sense of unity, a feeling that we were all connected by something bigger than ourselves. It was a moment of pure joy and excitement. There were other times when television pulled us together, too. I remember the moon landings in 1969. Staying up to watch Neil Armstrong become the first man to walk on the moon was a challenge. But it was worth it. Millions of British viewers stayed awake late into the night to watch history unfold. Parents shook their children awake, whispering, "You'll want to remember this for the rest of your life." And indeed, they did. The sight of Armstrong stepping onto the lunar surface was grainy, ghost-like, but unforgettable. He took a small step for man, but a giant leap for mankind. And we watched, breathless with anticipation. It was a reminder of humanity's boundless curiosity and courage. For me, watching that broadcast on a tiny black and white TV set, I felt a sense of wonder and awe. The idea that humans could leave the Earth and explore the universe seemed almost inconceivable. And yet here we were seeing it happen in real time. Do you remember the household rituals? The way someone had to twist the dial on the set until the picture stopped rolling? Or the way the television sometimes went fuzzy and you had to adjust the rabbit ears on the aerial? Well, there was no Netflix, Amazon Prime, or YouTube. If you wanted to watch something, you had to wait until it was broadcast. And if you missed it, tough luck. There was no recording it. You had to be there in person. Families learned patience and teamwork because if one person held the aerial just right, no one dared move until the show was finished. Getting the perfect picture was an art form, and we were all willing participants. Remember the furniture-like quality of the TV itself? Heavy, wooden, and often with a polished cabinet, it was a proud possession in a living room. For some working-class families, buying a television was a major decision, sometimes bought on hire purchase with weekly payments. Yet once it was in the home, it became the centerpiece, almost like an honored guest that everyone respected. Food was another shared experience that brought families together around the television. Remember the excitement of Saturday morning cartoons or the anticipation of a new series, like Doctor Who or The Avengers. These were the highlights of our weekend, and we wouldn't miss them for the world. And of course, there was the ritual of tea and biscuits during the 6 o'clock news. It was a time for the family to come together and discuss the events of the day, and it was also an excuse for a break. After all, who could face the evening news without a nice cup of tea and a biscuit? Children were particularly drawn to the television. Shows like Blue Peter and Look and Learn were a big hit, and they taught us everything from how to tie a shoelace to the wonders of space exploration. We loved those craft ideas, and we tried to recreate them ourselves. Of course, we weren't always successful, but we never gave up trying. Another great thing about television was the way it exposed us to different cultures and ideas. Documentaries about far-off lands and people ignited our imagination and made us feel like we were part of something bigger than ourselves. We learned about the world and its inhabitants, and we expanded our horizons. It was a wonderful way to broaden our minds and gain a deeper understanding of the world around us. However, it wasn't all good news. There was a downside to this shared experience. One criticism of television was that it could be a passive activity. Some people argue that spending too much time watching TV could lead to a decline in critical thinking skills. They believe that we should be more active in our leisure time and that watching TV was a waste of time. Of course, they had a point. It is important to be active and engaged in our communities rather than just sitting around passively consuming content. But watching TV isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be a great way to relax and unwind after a busy day, and it doesn't have to be passive. There are plenty of shows that encourage discussion and critical thinking. Despite the criticisms, television has remained a beloved part of British culture. It has evolved over the years, but it has never lost its ability to captivate and entertain us. From the early days of black and white broadcasts to the advent of color, from the monopolist BBC to the explosion of cable channels, television has always been there for us. It has been a witness to our lives, capturing the highs and lows, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and tragedies. As we look to the future, we can be sure that television will continue to be a source of entertainment and enlightenment. With the rise of streaming services, we have more access to content than ever before. We can watch what we want, when we want, where we want. But let's not forget the golden age of television, when families would gather around the box, sharing laughter and tears, creating memories that would last a lifetime. Let's not forget the magic of television. Thank you very much for watching. Did you know that my channel has a podcast now? Yes, it's true. Now you can listen to the audio from our videos on various platforms. It is so satisfying to see how people have different reactions to things. Anyway, here's the first episode of a nostalgia series where I take a lighthearted look back at times gone by. And what better way to start than with the 1960s, a decade of change and challenge, but also one of great British innovation and achievement. By the end of the 1950s, television had become a regular feature in most British homes, and the 1960s saw the British public fall in love with their new medium. The 1960s also saw the rise of British comedy on TV. Shows like Steptoe and Son Until Death Us Do Part made people laugh, but also made them think about society. Then there were drama series such as the Forsyte Saga, which kept entire families hooked. By the end of the decade, television was no longer just a novelty, it was an essential part of daily life, shaping culture, conversation, and even politics. In 1964, the BBC reported that 26 million people watched the wedding of the decade between two real-life royals, focusing on the bride rather than the groom. Yes, I'm talking about Princess Margaret and photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones. Who could forget the sight of the bride in her magnificent white gown, walking down the aisle of Westminster Abbey to the strains of Wagner as Here Comes the Bride? For many, it was a real-life fairy tale. Then there was the arrival of colored television in 1967. This was a time when black and white television was still the norm, but the first color television service was launched in 1963 in Britain, and 3 years later, the BBC began broadcasting regular scheduled color programs. Although color sets were very expensive, causing a huge surge in sales, it would be a few years before color pictures became a regular feature in British homes for many. Black and white remained the norm until the early 1970s, but it wasn't just about the picture. Television in the 1960s offered a wide range of programming that appealed to all ages and interests. There were game shows like Lingo, which tested contestants' knowledge and vocabulary. Then there were music shows like Ready, Steady, Go, and Top of the Pops, which introduced young people to the latest pop music and dance trends. And let's not forget the iconic The Morecambe and Wise Show, which brought families together with its blend of comedy sketches. musical performances, and audience participation. Of course, television wasn't without its critics. Some argued that it was too American and didn't reflect British culture. Others felt that it was becoming too dominant in people's lives. However, the vast majority of British people embraced television as a positive force in their lives. They enjoyed the escapism it provided, as well as the opportunity to share in the experiences of others. The impact of television on British society in the 1960s cannot be overstated. It was a medium that brought people together, creating a sense of shared experience and identity. Families discussed last night's program at work, in school, or in the market. Television gave people not only shared memories, but also a shared identity. As the 1960s drew to a close, it was clear that television had come of age in Britain. It had become an essential part of daily life, shaping culture, conversation, and even politics. The black and white glow of the television screen may have been a novelty in the 1950s, but by the end of the 1960s, it was a constant presence in British homes. People no longer asked, "Who's watching television?" The real question was, "What are you watching?" Now I want to hear from you. What are your memories of television in the 1960s? What shows did you watch, and how did you feel when they were taken off the air? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. You can also follow me on social media. Until next time, goodbye. And now it's time for one last look back at the wonderful world of 1960s British television. It's difficult to imagine today, but there was a time when owning a television set wasn't a given. In fact, in the early 1960s, only around a quarter of British households had one. But by the end of the decade, this figure had soared to over 90%. The British were absolutely obsessed with their telly boxes, as they were known, and it wasn't long before advertising followed. The first commercial TV ad in the UK was screened in 1955, but it wasn't until the 1960s that adverts became a regular feature. Some viewers felt that these interruptions to their programs were an unwelcome intrusion, but there is no denying that television advertising completely changed the way that people consumed their media and also the way that businesses marketed their products. In this final episode of the 1960s British TV series, we'll be taking a look at some of the most memorable adverts from that era. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Thanks to the sponsor for this video. Now let's go back to those iconic commercials. What did people watch while waiting for their favorite shows? Well, how about a heartwarming drama about a family of 5 living in the English country? Side, oh, yes. Please, oh, no. Don't go. Just wait till you hear about all the exciting adventures that they have. You'll be eating your cornflakes in no time. Or perhaps you prefer something a little bit more thrilling. How about a crime drama set in the bustling streets of London? Oh yes, please. Oh no, don't go. Just wait till you hear about all the daring heists and double crossings that you'll see. You won't be able to take your eyes off the screen. Tired of the same old detective shows? Why not try something completely different? A comedy sketch show that will have you in stitches. Oh yes, please. Oh no, don't go. Just wait till you hear about all the hilarious characters that you'll meet. You'll be rolling on the floor with laughter. The 1960s was a time of great change and innovation in Britain and television. Advertising played a big part in that. It not only gave businesses a new way to reach their customers, but it also provided viewers with a glimpse into the exciting world of consumerism. So the next time you're flipping through the channels, take a moment to appreciate all the wonderful and wacky ads that have come before. And that's the end of our journey through 1960s British television. We hope you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane and learned a thing or two along the way. Don't forget to leave us a comment and tell us which TV show from the 1960s you remember most fondly. Until next time, goodbye.